Good morning, Dr. Okongo. Just going to give you a brief overview of the video that you assigned and my responses to it. So the global economy post-World War II saw a major boom, with America being at the forefront of that holding. The Bretton Woods Conference of 1944 granted power to the United States dollar to become the new world standard, while other countries would fix their currencies to our dollar. During this time, the United States held the world's gold in its vaults, but there were concerns that were rising when the rate of U.S. spending did not match the gold in store. Countries began to lose trust in the United States as a fiduciary agent, and in 1971, there was a new financial system, and this is when President Nixon detached the U.S. dollar from gold, and basically created a world fiat system. This was the largest scale fiat system that we have seen before, where the U.S. was attached to gold anymore, and other currencies were attached to our dollar. So there was a free-floating currency system that was just based off of trust. And yeah, we're recognizing now that that's not really a good thing. We see a rise in inflation, a rise in printed money, and a rise in global distrust of the U.S. dollar. So a few reasons for that, one of which the video explains that the United States is a Ponzi scheme. So in a legitimate business, it functions like a top-down pyramid. It normally has low-risk investment strategy, where there's a product that produces a value at a higher rate than the investment, and the investors can then make their money back with a percentage of interest added to that investment. The Ponzi scheme, however, is inverted. In this structure, there is no product, and the entity, or in this case, we're saying the United States, it siphons money from each level of investors, with the bottom level of investors supporting the previous investors as well as the entity. And in this system, it requires more and more investors in order to sustain itself, and eventually and inevitably, this system always fails, because people lose trust, and new investors, they're not going to be found. Word gets out that it's a Ponzi scheme and no one's going to want to invest. The United States has been operating as a Ponzi scheme, at least according to this video, since before the global fiat had been initiated. So the U.S. government can borrow and spend as much money as it wants, and in order for this to happen, the government has to take out a loan from the Federal Reserve, and then the Fed then prints that money as an IOU. And then the bonds are sold to other countries, banks, or even private citizens. And then these investors, they're viewing these IOUs as a risk-free or low-risk investment, when really the entire system is set up as a Ponzi scheme. So the U.S. runs a deficit, or has been running a deficit since 1907, in order to pay for the loans that it receives. So basically, it gets a loan from the Fed, and that loan gets sold to another country, and in order to pay off that loan, it gets another IOU to pay it off. And so we just build and build and build and build. And so we're always constantly borrowing money from the Federal Reserve, and it just compounds more and more debt. So essentially, the U.S. is paying IOUs with more IOUs. And these investors believe that they're receiving a valuable, product, but the money has no backing because we're not backed by gold anymore, and it's super inflated because we have the power to print money. So we don't have anything fixed to our dollar other than this idea of trust, which doesn't really exist, or it's being diminished as we speak. And this video also talked about money at the small scale, so how it affects, individual people. So because the government is printing more and more money every year, and that this money is a fiat currency, the value of the dollar is being eroded. And so what this looks like is high inflation with a drastic decrease in standard of living. So this is the example that the video gave, just to follow the money and the value behind it each decade, really. So in the middle of the 20th century, a husband could work one job that really didn't require any special skills. You could afford a wife, kids, a house, and retirement. And then this moved into a dual income household around the 70s, 80s, where that same standard of living required both spouses to work. And then in the 90s, that same living standard required both spouses to work. And there was a decrease in the household savings rate. So savings across the board for individual people went down to zero. And then by the early 2000s, not only were both spouses needing to work. There was no savings. Now people had to borrow money in order to afford a reduced standard of living. And since then, we're seeing a rise in personal debt, a lack of banks lending out money now, and then that standard of living decreasing year by year. And there's a little bit of a misnomer, you know? So there are two forms of inflation that the video talks about. One is core inflation, and the other one is headline inflation. And the US government intentionally skews these two. We also have a different inflation formula than what was used during Carter's presidency. If we were to actually look at true headline inflation, and this was pre-COVID, this video, it would look closer to 9 to 10%. Yeah, which is pretty crazy. And really, just to wrap it up, like, all of the things that happened since we have detached our dollar from gold, we've seen this floating system is not working. It's eventually coming to a crash. We're really grounding, we're grounding our, I guess, ship, so to speak, of the US dollar, because like there's a theory that, and I guess it's not so much of a theory, that we are intentionally devaluing our gold or suppressing the value of gold in order to like continue this Ponzi scheme and this fiat currency that we have, and we're lying about where this gold's going. You know, it seems like there might be some creative accounting measures that are being taken place, and it seems like people are about to be really pissed off at the US, to be honest with you. Yeah, so there's definitely some spillover effects that happened because of what President Nixon did. And really, in all honesty, it hasn't been we had these huge booms and busts, really, but like, we spent so much money, we built up our economy, but the swinging pendulum is going to swing back, and we're going to crash, and we're kicking this can down the road, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And eventually, like, we're not going to be able or have the power to kick it down again, and it's just going to crush us. But yeah, sorry I went a little bit over time, but I hope that explains it all.